nationalism and nation, and our concern will be not so much to understand why nationalism has arisen or what functions it serves. Rather, our concern would be to think carefully about nationalism and assess its claims and aspirations. After studying this chapter, you should be able to understand the concepts of nation and nationalism, acknowledge the strengths and limitations of the nationalism, appreciate the need for ensuring a link between the democracy and nationalism, and now let's discuss about the introducing nationalism. So if we were to take a quick poll of what people commonly understand by the term nationalism, we are likely to get responses which talk about the patriotism, national flags, sacrificing for the country, and like Republic Day parade in Delhi is a striking symbol of Indian nationalism, and it brings out the sense of power, strength, as well as diversity, which many associate with the Indian nation. But if we try to go deeper, we will find that it is difficult to arrive at a precise and widely accepted definitions of the term nationalism, and this need not mean that we should abandon the efforts. Nationalism needs to be studied because it plays such an important role in world affairs. During the last 2 centuries or more, nationalism has emerged as one of the most compelling of political creeds, which has helped to shape history. It has inspired intense loyalties as well as deep hatreds. It has united people as well as divided them, helped to liberate them from the oppressive rule as well as being the cause of conflict and bitterness and wars. It has been a factor in the breakup of empires and states. Nationalist struggles have contributed to the drawing and redoing of the boundaries of the states and empires. At present, a large part of the world is divided into different nation states, although the process of reordering of states boundaries has not come to an end, and separatist struggles within existing states are common. Nationalism has passed through the many phases. For instance, in the 19th century Europe, it led to the unification of the number of small kingdoms into the larger nation states, and the present-day German and Italian states were formed through such process of unification and consolidation. A large number of new states were also founded and in Latin America. Along with the consolidation of the state boundaries, local dialects and local loyalties were also gradually consolidated into the state loyalties and common languages. The people of the new states acquired a new political identity which was based on the membership of the nation state, and we have seen a similar process of consolidation taking place in our own country in the last century or more. But nationalism also accompanied and contributed to the breakup of large empires such as the Austro-Hungarian and Russian empires in the early 20th century in the Europe, as well as the breakup of the British, French, Dutch and Portuguese empires in Asia and Africa, and the struggle for the freedom from the colonial rule by the India and the other former colonies were nationalist struggles inspired by the desire to establish the national states which would be independent of the foreign controls, and the process of redrawing states boundaries continued to take place since 1960. Even apparently stable nation states have been confronted by the nationalist demands put forward by groups or regions, and these may include demands for the separate statehood today in the many parts of the world. We witness nationalist struggles that threaten to divide existing states. Such separatist movements have developed among the Quebecois in Canada and the Basques in northern Spain, the Kurds in Turkey and Iraq, and the Tamils in Sri Lanka, among the others. And the language of nationalism is also used by some groups in India. Arab nationalism today may hope to unite Arab countries in a pan-Arab union, but separatist movements like the Basques or Kurds struggle to divide the existing states. We may all agree that nationalism is a powerful force in the world even today, but it is more difficult to arrive at agreement regarding the definition of the terms like nation or nationalism. What is the nation? Why do people form nations? And to what do nations aspire? Why are people ready to sacrifice and even die for their nation? Why and in what way are claims to nationhood linked to claims to statehood? Do nations have a right to statehood or national self-determination, or can the claims of nationalism be met without conceding separate statehood? In this chapter, we will explore some of these issues. In this age of globalization, the world is shrinking. We are living in a global village. Nations are irrelevant, and that is not the case. Nationalism is still relevant. You can see this when Indian team goes out to play cricket, or when you discover that Indians living abroad still watch the Bollywood films. Now, nations and nationalism. So, a nation is not any casual collection of people. At the same time, it is also different from the other groups or communities found in the human societies. It is different from the family, which is based on the face-to-face relationships with each member, having direct personal knowledge of the identity and character of the others. It is also different from the tribes. It is also different from the tribes and clans and other kinships groups in which ties of marriage and descent link members to each other. So that even if we do not personally know all the members, we can, if need to be, traced the links that bind them to us. But as a member of a nation, we may never come up face to face with most of our fellow nationals, nor need we share ties of descent with them. Yet nations exist. Yet nations exist are lived in and valued by their members. It is commonly believed that nations are constituted by a group who share certain features such as descent or language or religions or ethnicity, but there is in fact no common set of characteristics which is present in all the nations. Many nations do not have a common language. Canada is an example here. Canada includes English speaking as well as French speaking people. India also has a large number of languages which are broken in different regions and by different communities, nor do many nations have a common religions to unite them. The same could be said of the other characteristics such as race or descents. And what then constitutes a nation? A nation is to great extent on an imagined community held together by the collective beliefs, aspirations, and imagination of its members. It is based on the certain assumptions which people make about the collective whole with which they identify. Let us identify and understand some of the assumptions which people make about the nation. Here, let's do it. Identify any patriotic song in your language. How is the nation described is this song? Identify and watch any patriotic films in your language. How has nationalism been portrayed and its complexities worked out in these films? Here, shared beliefs. So first, a nation is constituted by the belief. Nations are not like mountains, rivers, or buildings which we can see and feel. They are not things which exist independent of the beliefs that people have about them. To speak for people as a nation is not to make a comment about their physical characteristics or behavior. Rather, it is to refer to the collective identity and vision for the future of a group which aspires to have an independent political existence. To this extent, nations can be compared with a team. When we speak of a team, we mean a set of people who work or play together and, more importantly, conceive of themselves as a collective group. If they did not think of themselves in this way, they would cease to be a team and be simply different individuals playing a game or undertaking a task. A nation exists when its members believe that they belong together. Why don't you cheer for our team? Don't you have any nationalist spirit? I am as much a nationalist as anyone else. I cast my vote, I pay my taxes, and I respect the laws of our country. I am also proud to belong to this country. Now, history. Second, people who see themselves as a nation also embody a sense of continuing historically identity. That is, the nations perceives themselves as stretching back into the past as well as reaching into the future. They articulate for themselves a sense of their own history by drawing on collective memories, legends, historical records to outline the continuing identity of the nation. And thus, nationalists in the India invoked its ancient civilizations and cultural heritage and other achievements to claim that India has had a long and continuing history as a civilization and that this civilizational continuity and unity is the basis of the Indian nation. Jawaharlal Nehru, for instance, wrote in his book The Discovery of India, though outwardly there was diversity and infinite variety among the people, everywhere there was that tremendous impress of the oneness which held all of us together in the ages past, whatever political fate or misfortune had befallen us. Territory. Third, nations identify with a particular territory, sharing a common past and living together on a particular territory over a long period of time gives people a sense of their collective identity. It helps them to imagine themselves as one people. It is therefore not surprising that people who see themselves as a nation speak of a homeland. The territory they occupied and the land on which they have lived has a special significance for them, and they claim it as their own. Nations, however, characterize the homeland in the different ways. For instance, as motherland or fatherland or holy land, and the Jewish people, for instance, in spite of being dispersed and scattered in different parts of the world, always claimed that their original homeland was in the Palestine and the Promised Land, and the Indian nation identifies with the rivers, mountains, and regions of the Indian subcontinent. However, since more than one set of the people may have may lay claim to the same territory, and the aspirations for the homeland has been a major cause of the conflict in the world. Now, shared political ideals, while territory and shared historical identity plays an important role in creating a sense of oneness, it is shared vision of the future and the collective aspiration to have an independent political existence that distinguishes groups from the nations. Members of a nation share a vision of the kind of the state they want to build, and they affirm, among the other things, a set of values and principles such as democracy, secularism, and liberalism. These ideals represent the terms under which they come together and are willing to live together. It represents, in other words, their political identity as a nation. In a democracy, it is shared commitment to a set of political values and ideals that is the most desirable basis of a political community or a nation state. Within it, members of a political community are bound by a set of obligations, and these obligations arise from the recognition of the rights of each other as citizens. A nation is strengthened when its people acknowledges and accept their obligations to their fellow members. We might even say that recognition of this framework of obligations is the strongest test of loyalty to the nation. Common political identity. So many people believe that a shared political visions about the state and society we wish to create is not enough to bind individuals together as a nation. They seek instead a shared cultural identity such as common language or common descent, and there is no doubt that speaking the same language makes it easier for us to communicate with each other, and sharing the same religion gives us a set of common beliefs and social practices. Observing the same festivals, seeking the same holidays, and holding the same symbols valuable can bring people together, but it can also pose a threat to the values that we cherish in a democracy. There are two reasons for this. One, all the major religions in the world are internally diverse, and they have survived and evolved through the dialogue within the community. As a result, there exists within each religion a number of sects who differ significantly in their interpretations of the religion, text, and norms. If we ignore these differences and force an identity on the basis of a common religion, so we are likely to create a highly authoritative and oppressive society. Two, most of the societies are culturally diverse, and they have people belonging to the different religions and languages living together in the same territory. To impose a single religious or linguistic identity as a condition of belonging to a particular state would necessarily exclude some groups. It might restrict the religion's liberty of the excluded groups or disadvantage those who do not speak the national language. Either way, the ideal that we cherish most in democracy, namely equal treatment and liberty for all, would be severely limited. For both these reasons, it is desirable to imagine the nation in political rather than cultural terms, and that is democracy's need to emphasize and expect loyalty to a set of values that may be enshrined in the constitution of the country rather than adherence to a particular religion, race, or language. Next जो है वो क्या है? Next step, we have identified about some of the ways in which nations express their sense of collective identity. We have also seen why democratic states need to force this identity on the basis of shared political ideals. But we are still left with an important question, namely, why do people imagine themselves as a nation? What are the some of the aspirations of the different nations? In the next two sections, we shall try to address these questions. National self-determination. Nations, unlike other social groups, seek the right to govern themselves and determine their future development. They seek, in other words, the right to self-determination. In making this claim, a nation seeks recognition and acceptance by the international community of its status as a distinct political entity or a state. Most often, these claims come from the people who have lived together on a given land for a long period of time and who have a sense of common identity. In some cases, such claims to self-determination are linked also to the desire to form a state in which the culture of the groups is protected, if not privileged. Claims of the latter kind were frequently made in the 19th century in the Europe. The notion of one culture, one state began to gain the acceptability at the time. Subsequently, the idea of one culture, one state was employed while reordering state boundaries after World War I. The Treaty of Versailles established a number of small, newly independent states, but it proved virtually impossible to satisfy all the demands for the self-determination which were made at the time. Besides reorganization of the state boundaries to satisfy the demands of one culture, one state led to the mass migration of the population across the state boundaries. Billions of people as a consequence were displaced from their homes and expelled from the land which had been their home for the generations. Many others became victims of the common violence. Now next is humanity paid a heavy price for reorganizing boundaries in a way that culturally distinct communities could form separate nation states. Beside, even in these efforts, it was not possible to ensure that the newly created states contained only one ethnic community. Here you can see now next is demand for the national self-determination in the Basque. Demands for the national self-determination have been raised in different parts of the world. Let us look at the one such case. Basque is a hilly and prosperous region in the Spain. This region is recognized by the Spanish government as an autonomous region within the Spanish Federation, but But the leaders of the Basque nationalist movements are not satisfied with this autonomy. They want this region to become a separate country. Supporters of this movement have used constitutional until recently violent means to press for this demand. And Basque nationalists say that their culture is very different from the Spanish culture, and they have their own language that does not resemble Spanish at all. Only one third of the people in Basque understand that language today. The hilly terrain makes the Basque region geographically distinct from the rest of the Spain. Ever since the Roman days, the Basque region never surrendered its autonomy to the Spanish rulers. Its system of justice, administration, and finance were governed by its own unique arrangements, and the modern Basque nationalist movement started when, around the end of the 19th century, the Spanish rulers tried to abolish these unique political administrative arrangements. In the 20th century, the Spanish dictator Franco further cut down this autonomy. He went as far as to ban the use of Basque language in the public places and even homes, and these repressive measures have now been withdrawn. But the leaders of Basque movement continue to be suspicious of the motives of the Spanish government and fearful of the entry of the outsiders in their region. And their opponents says that the Basque separatists are trying to make political gains out of an issue already resolved. Do you think Basque nationalists are justified in demanding a separate nation? And is Basque a nation? What more would you like to know? Before you can answer this question, can you think of similar examples from different parts of the world? Can you think of the regions and groups in our country where such demands have been made? And indeed, most states had more than one ethnic and cultural communities living within its boundaries. These communities, which were often small in the numbers and constituted the minority within the states, were often disadvantaged. Hence, the problem of accommodating minorities as equal citizens remained. The only positive aspect of these developments was that it granted political recognition to the various groups who saw themselves as distinct nations and wanted the opportunity to govern themselves and determine their own future. The right to national self-determination has also been asserted by the national liberation movement in Asia and Africa when they were struggling against the colonial domination. Nationalist movements maintained the political independence would provide dignity and recognition to the colonized people and also help them to protect the collective interests of their people. Most national liberation movements were inspired by the goal of bringing justice and rights and prosperity to the nation. However, here also it proved almost impossible to ensure that each cultural group, some of whom claimed to be distinct nations, could achieve political independence and statehood. As a result of migration of populations, border wars, and violence have continued to plague many countries in the region. Thus, we have the paradoxical situation of nation states which themselves had achieved independence through the struggle, now acting against the minorities within their own territories who claim the right to national self-determination. Virtually every state in the world today faces the dilemma of the how to deal with the movements for the self-determination, and this has raised questions about the right to national self-determination. More and more people are beginning to realize that the solution does not lie in the creating new states but in making existing states more democratic and equal. Thus, that is in the ensuring that people with different cultural and ethnic identities live and coexist as partners and equal citizens within the country. This may be essential not only for resolving problems arising from the new claims for self-determination but also for building a strong and united state. After all, a nation state which does not respect the rights and cultural identity of minorities within the state would find it difficult to gain the loyalty of its members. Now, here nationalism and pluralism. Nationalism and pluralism, once we abandon the idea of one culture, one state, it becomes necessary to consider ways by which different cultures and communities can survive and flourish within a country. It is in pursuit of this goal that many democratic societies today have introduced measures for recognizing and protecting the identity of a cultural minority communities living within their territory. And the Indian Constitution has an elaborate set of provisions for the protection of religious, linguistics, and cultural minorities. Here, cut out clippings from the various newspapers and magazines related to the demands of the various groups in India and abroad for the right to self-determination. Form an opinion about the following. What are the reasons behind these demands? What strategies have they employed? Are they claims justified? What do you think could be the possible solution? The kind of groups' rights which have been granted in the different countries include constitutional protection for the language, culture, and religion of minority groups and their members. In some cases, identified communities also have the right to representation as a group in the legislative bodies and other state institutions. Such rights may be justified on the grounds that they provide equal treatment and protection of the law for the members of these groups, as well as protection for the cultural identity of the groups. Different groups need to be granted recognition as a part of the national community, and this means that the national identity has to be defined defined in an inclusive manner, which can recognize the importance and unique contribution of all the cultural communities within the state. And although it is hoped that granting groups recognition and protection would satisfy their aspirations, some groups may continue to demand separate statehood, and this may seem paradoxical when globalization is also spreading in the world, but nationalist aspirations continue to motivate many groups and communities. एंड उसके बाद जो नेक्स्ट है वो क्या है, टैगोर्स क्रिटिक्स ऑफ नेशनलिज्म. सो पैट्रियोटिज्म कैन नॉट बी आवर फाइनल स्पिरिचुअल शेल्टर. माई रिफ्यूज इज ह्यूमैनिटी. आई विल नॉट बाई ग्लास फॉर द प्राइस ऑफ द डायमंड्स एंड आई विल नेवर अलाउ पैट्रियोटिज्म टू ट्रिम्फ ओवर द ह्यूमैनिटी एज लॉन्ग एज आई लिव हेयर. This was said by the Rabindranath Tagore. He was against the colonial rule and asserted India's right to independence, and he felt that in the British administration of the colonies, there was no place for the upholding of dignity of the human relationships, an idea which was otherwise cherished in the British civilization. Tagore made a distinction between the opposing Western imperialisms and rejecting Western civilizations. While Indians should be rooted in their own culture and heritage, they should not resist learning freely and profitably from the abroad. A critic of what he called patriotism is a persistent theme in his writing. He was very critical of the narrow expressions of the nationalism that he found at work in the parts of our independence movement. In particular, he was afraid that a rejection of the West in the favor of what looked like Indian traditions was not only limiting in itself, it could easily turn into hostility to other influences from abroad, including Christianity, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, and Islam, which have been present in our country. And considerable generosity and skill is needed for the countries to be able to deal with such demands in a democratic manner. The right to national self-determination was often understood to include the right to independent statehood for the nationalities, but not only would it be impossible to grant independent statehood to every group that sees itself as a distinct cultural group or nation, it would probably also be undesirable. It might lead to the formation of a number of the states too small to be economically and politically viable, and it could multiply the problems of minorities, and the rights has now been reinterpreted to mean granting certain democratic rights for a nationality within a state. The world we live in is one that is deeply conscious of the importance of giving recognition to the identities. Today we witness many struggles for the recognition of the group identities, and many of which employ the language of nationalism. While we need to acknowledge the claims of identity, we should be careful not to allow identity claims to lead to divisions and violence in the society. We need to remember that each person has many identities. For instance, a person may have identities based on the gender, caste, religion, language, or region, and may be proud of all of them. So long as each person feels that he or she can freely express the different dimensions of his or her personality, they may not feel the need to make the claims on the state for the political recognition and concessions. For any one identity in a democracy, the political identity of citizen should encompass the different identities which people may have. It would be dangerous if intolerant and homogenizing form of the identity and nationalism are allowed to develop. So this chapter is also over, nationalism. In the next chapter, we will be discussing about the secularism. Thank you so much.